Think about the last time you were in a crowded room. Your eyes were probably drawn to the loudest person there, the one cracking jokes, waving their hands, and demanding to be the center of the universe. We've been conditioned to think that noise equals power and that aggression equals a threat. But Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, realized that we are looking in the wrong direction. The real danger doesn't come from the person shouting, it comes from the quietest person in the corner. This is the individual who has been pushed to their absolute limit but hasn't uttered a word. This is the misunderstood empath. Most people look at an empath and see a soft target, someone they can manipulate, drain, or walk over because they seem so accommodating. That is a fatal mistake. Jung's research reveals that the empath's silence isn't a sign of submission. It is a sign of immense internal containment. They are not exploding because they are strong enough to hold the pressure, but everyone has a breaking point. When that quiet person finally decides they've had enough, the threat they pose isn't physical. It's a psychological reckoning that can dismantle a manipulator's entire world in seconds. To understand why this person is so dangerous, you have to understand Jung's concept of the persona and the shadow. The persona is the public mask we all wear to fit into society. For the empath, that mask is usually one of kindness, patience, and extreme tolerance. They show the world a face that says, "I understand you and I will help you." But Jung warned that the larger the persona, the darker and more powerful the shadow becomes. The shadow is the vault where we lock away our rage, our boundaries, and our capacity for cold, hard truth. Because empaths spend so much time absorbing the emotions of others and playing the role of the peacemaker, they develop a shadow that is incredibly sophisticated and sharp. While you are busy trying to play them, they are unconsciously cataloging every one of your inconsistencies and lies. They aren't being naive. They are operating in what Jung called the transcendent function. This is a high-level psychological state where a person can hold two totally contradictory truths at the same time. They can see that you are a liar, yet still choose to treat you with kindness. They can feel your malice, yet still hope for your growth. This isn't weakness. It's a massive psychological tension they hold within themselves. However, when a manipulator pushes too far, that tension snaps. When an empath finally integrates their shadow, they stop using their feeling side to protect you and start using their seeing side to expose you. They transition from the person who understands your pain to the person who sees through your performance with surgical precision. They don't need to scream or fight because they know exactly where your psychological armor is thin. Jung's discovery suggests that the most terrifying thing a narcissist or a manipulator can face is a quiet person who has stopped caring about being nice. Once that mask of the persona is dropped, you aren't dealing with a victim anymore. You are dealing with someone who has faced their own darkness and now has the power to reflect yours back at you until you can't stand the sight of it. They become the silent threat because their power doesn't come from external force, but from an internal, unshakable clarity that can no longer be controlled. The biggest mistake a narcissist makes is assuming that an empath's kindness is a result of low self-esteem or a lack of options. They look at someone who is patient, forgiving, and deeply emotional and conclude, this person is weak, I can use them. In the narcissist world, everything is a power struggle, so they view compassion as a flaw in someone's armor. They see the empath as a bottomless well of energy they can tap into without consequence. But here is the catastrophic miscalculation. They fail to realize that the empath's soft exterior is actually built upon a foundation of reinforced steel. Carl Jung discovered that people who lead with their hearts, those who are feeling dominant, often possess the most resilient psychological structures in existence. Why? Because they have had to navigate a world that is often cold and indifferent while keeping their sensitivity intact. They haven't survived by becoming hard. They've survived by becoming incredibly complex and durable. When a narcissist tries to break an empath, they aren't hitting a fragile glass ornament. They're hitting a high-tech shock absorber that has been tempered through years of emotional labor. The narcissist believes they are playing a game of checkers, but the empath has been playing grandmaster-level chess the entire time without even realizing it. While the narcissist is busy spinning webs of lies and performing for attention, the empath is subconsciously performing a deep-level emotional audit. They don't just feel your presence. They are decoding your micro-expressions, your tone of voice, and the gaps between what you say and what you actually do. Jung's research into the human psyche suggests that this isn't just intuition. It is a form of advanced pattern recognition. For the empath, every lie the narcissist tells, every gaslighting comment, and every subtle act of emotional violence isn't forgotten. It is stored as raw data in the unconscious. They might stay in the relationship for a long time, leading the narcissist to believe they've won, but in reality, the empath's mind is silently cataloging evidence. They are building a massive internal database of the narcissist's true nature. This is where the situation turns truly dangerous for the manipulator. When that internal database reaches critical mass, a psychological shift occurs that Jung referred to as a psychological rebirth. Up until this point, the empath has been using their energy to understand and heal the narcissist. But once the betrayal becomes too heavy and the data proves the narcissist is a lost cause, that energy is suddenly pulled back and redirected inward. The pain of the betrayal acts as a catalyst, sparking a transformation that turns the empath's sensitivity into a weapon of absolute clarity. They stop feeling for you and start seeing through you. The narcissist wakes up one day to find that the person they thought they controlled is gone, replaced by someone who is eerily calm, analytically sharp, and completely immune to their tactics. The empath hasn't just left, they have evolved. They have integrated the shadow parts of themselves, their anger, their boundaries, and their self-preservation, and turned their former wounds into a level of wisdom that the narcissist simply cannot compute. The predator suddenly realizes they are locked in a room with someone they never truly understood, and by then, it's already too late. To truly understand why a pushed empath is so dangerous, you have to understand the psychological law of enantiodromia. Carl Jung borrowed this term from ancient philosophy to describe a fundamental rule of the human mind. Eventually, everything turns into its opposite. Think of a pendulum swinging. The further it is pushed in one direction, the more momentum it gathers to swing back with equal force to the other side. This is exactly what happens within the psyche of an empath who has been exploited for too long. For years, they may have been the ultimate giver, always patient, always forgiving, and always putting others' needs before their own. They swung so far into the light of self-sacrifice that they ignored their own needs entirely. But the law of enantiodromia dictates that this state cannot last forever. When the pressure of betrayal reaches a breaking point, the pendulum doesn't just stop, it swings back with terrifying velocity. This is the great flip. It is the moment when the most flexible person you know suddenly becomes an unmovable wall. This transition is often shocking to those around them, especially manipulators who are used to the empath's softness. Suddenly, the person who used to beg for an explanation is met with total silence. The person who used to give endless chances now gives none. But it is crucial to understand that this shift isn't about the empath becoming evil or cruel. It's actually a sign of profound psychological health called shadow integration. Throughout their life, the empath likely repressed their shadow, the parts of themselves that know how to say no, the parts that hold anger, and the parts that demand respect. They viewed these traits as mean or wrong. But during the great flip, they finally stop running from their shadow and start using it. They aren't losing their heart, they are simply armoring it. They are finding their backbone by realizing that being a good person does not mean being a doormat. They finally understand that true kindness requires the strength to be dangerous when necessary. The most powerful part of this transformation is that the empath stops being reactive and starts being strategic. When you are reactive, you are controlled by the person hurting you. You cry, you scream, you defend yourself, and in doing so, you give the manipulator exactly the supply they want. But a flipped empath has already won the battle within themselves. They have faced the darkest parts of their own pain and emerged whole. Because they are no longer fighting for your approval or even your understanding, you lose all leverage over them. They don't need to destroy you or seek revenge because they have reached a state of psychological sovereignty where your opinion no longer carries weight. They have reclaimed their energy and redirected it toward their own life. This is the ultimate win in Jungian psychology. The moment an individual becomes so complete within themselves that the games of others simply cease to function. The great flip isn't just an end to a relationship, it's the birth of an unstoppable version of the self. The most terrifying moment for any manipulator is when they realize their target has stopped reacting. To understand why this is so powerful, you have to look at how power dynamics actually function. Most people are hooked into relationships through their wounds. They are reactive, meaning their emotions are controlled by what someone else says or does. If a narcissist ignores them, they chase. If a narcissist yells, they defend. But a transformed empath has reached a state Carl Jung called psychological autonomy. This means they have reclaimed the keys to their own emotional house. They have done the hard work of looking inward, healing their insecurities, and finding their own worth. Because they are now whole within themselves, they no longer need the external validation or the emotional hits that the manipulator used to provide. They effectively stop playing the game because the game requires two players who care about the outcome, and the empath has officially checked out. Jung noted that the most powerful position you can ever hold in a human dynamic is detachment born from understanding. This isn't the cold, empty detachment of someone who is bored or indifferent. It is the razor-sharp detachment of someone who finally sees the entire board. When an empath reaches this level, they don't retreat because they are hurt or scared. Those are emotional responses that the manipulator can still use to pull them back in. Instead, the empath steps back because they have achieved a level of clarity that is almost surgical. They see the manipulator's tactics, their insecurities, and their predictable patterns as if they were watching a movie they've seen 1,000 times. This detachment acts as an invisible shield. You can no longer gaslight someone who trusts their own eyes, and you can no longer hurt someone who has already accepted the truth of who you are. This leads to the most devastating weapon in the empath's arsenal, the mirror of reality. Deception and manipulation can only survive in a fog of confusion, guilt, and what-ifs. The manipulator relies on the empath to help them maintain their false image. But a detached empath stops holding up the pretty mirror and starts reflecting back the cold, hard reality. They don't do this with screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. They do it with calm, undeniable facts. When the manipulator tries to twist the truth, the empath simply reflects the reality back to them. I saw what you did, I heard what you said, and I am no longer participating in the lie. By refusing to engage in the drama, the empath forces the manipulator to stand alone with their own dysfunction. There is nothing more terrifying to a person living a lie than being forced to look at the truth without any distractions. The empath's detachment is the ultimate weapon because it doesn't just end the fight, it makes the fight impossible to continue. When an empath has been suppressed, gaslit, or pushed to the edge for too long, many people expect them to eventually break or descend into a state of emotional chaos. They expect a messy breakdown or a desperate plea for help. But according to Carl Jung, the exact opposite happens when the psyche reaches its limit. Instead of a storm of confusion, there is a sudden, quiet arrival of absolute clarity. This is the moment the fog lifts entirely. The empath stops asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and starts seeing exactly what is happening around them. This shift marks the transition from being a victim of their own sensitivity to becoming a master of it. It is the birth of the individuated self, the version of a person that is no longer a collection of rooms and reactions, but a complete unified force. They stop wasting their breath explaining their worth, their feelings, or their boundaries to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. Instead, they simply start deciding. They decide who gets access to them, who is allowed in their space, and who is permanently removed. This is Carl Jung's concept of individuation in its most potent, real-world application. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are by integrating every part of your soul, including the scary parts you were told to hide. For the empath, this means reclaiming their capacity for ironclad boundaries and realizing that their empathy is not a public utility for everyone to use, but a sacred resource. They realize that their ability to feel deeply is a superpower that requires a high level of security. When they reach this stage, they don't just have boundaries, they become their boundaries. There is no longer a need for negotiation or argument. If you cross a line, the door simply closes. This isn't done out of spite or anger. It is done out of a deep, unshakable respect for their own spirit. They have finally stopped looking for external permission to exist and have granted it to themselves. The result is what Jung described as a force of nature. An individuated empath is someone who has taken the very things that used to break them, their sensitivity, their deep capacity for love, and even the pain of their past betrayals, and forged them into a suit of psychological armor. They have transformed their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. They are dangerous to the manipulator, not because they are going to attack, seek revenge, or play dirty games, but because they have become untouchable. You cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs your validation. You cannot control someone who is perfectly comfortable walking away. You cannot break someone who has already been broken and learned how to rebuild themselves into something stronger. They become a living paradox, deeply sensitive, yet completely immovable. This is the ultimate evolution of the empath, a person who has mastered the art of being both soft enough to feel the world and strong enough to survive it without losing themselves ever again. The journey of the empath, as Carl Jung envisioned it, is the ultimate hero's journey of the human psyche. It is a descent into the darkness of betrayal and a climb back into the light of self-mastery. By the time an empath reaches this final stage, they have moved beyond the need for revenge or the desire to fix those who hurt them. They have achieved psychological sovereignty. They no longer seek external completion because they have found wholeness within their own skin. Jung believed that the highest form of human development is when someone can hold both their light and their shadow in conscious awareness. The transformed empath does exactly this. They feel deeply but love selectively. They understand completely but engage cautiously. They forgive fully but forget never. They have mastered the art of the appropriate response, being gentle with those who deserve it and firm with those who require it. In the end, the awakened empath is the most powerful force you will ever encounter, because they have mastered the one thing most people never do, the art of being complete alone. They no longer rescue those who enjoy drowning, and they no longer pour their sacred light into the black holes of toxic people. They have learned that true strength isn't the absence of sensitivity, it is sensitivity refined by wisdom. By transforming their greatest pain into their greatest power, they become living proof of Jung's greatest insight, that within every wound lies the seed of transcendence. They emerge from the fire not just healed, but holy, possessing a quiet strength that can never be manipulated, controlled, or broken again.